You think you can buy my heart with a bet? Her voice sliced through the opulent Manhattan penthouse, where champagne flutes clinked under glittering chandeliers. The young black woman, a trailblazing CEO of a tech startup, stood defiant, her crimson gown a stark contrast to the sea of judgmental gazes. In New York's elite circles, she faced whispered slurs, dismissive glances at her achievements, and questions about her place in a world of wealth and power. Yet her resolve burned brighter than their prejudice. A reckless wager by a billionaire's son sets her on a path of deception and revenge. But what unfolds is far more than a game. Will her strength rewrite his legacy, or will love blur the lines of justice? Subscribe to our channel for the latest stories and share in the comments where you're watching from. Can you guess her next move? Stick around to find out. The chandelier above cast 1,000 prisms of light across the penthouse, a glittering crown atop Manhattan's skyline. The air buzzed with the clink of champagne glasses, the murmur of power brokers in tailored suits, and the soft hum of jazz weaving through the crowd. Ethan Sterling stood at the center of it all, a 30-year-old prince of privilege, his sharp jawline and piercing blue eyes drawing every glance. His reputation as a playboy was as polished as the cufflinks on his bespoke tuxedo, and his arrogance was matched only by his unbroken streak in every challenge he'd ever faced. Tonight, in this gilded room atop New York, he was untouchable, or so he thought. His best friend Jack Thompson, a venture capitalist with a smirk as sharp as his wit, leaned against the bar, swirling a glass of amber liquid. The crowd parted slightly as Jack raised his voice, just enough to cut through the din. Ethan, you've conquered boardrooms, markets, and every woman in this city who's caught your eye. But I've got something you can't win. His tone was laced with mischief, daring Ethan to bite. Ethan arched an eyebrow, his lips curling into a confident grin. Name it, Jack. You know I don't lose. Jack's eyes gleamed as he set his glass down, the clink against the marble bar deliberate. $3 million says you can't get a certain woman to fall for you and agree to marry you in 2 months. He paused, letting the weight of the challenge settle. She's not your usual type, Ethan. She's different. The room seemed to hush, or perhaps it was just Ethan's focus narrowing. A few nearby guests exchanged glances, their whispers tinged with curiosity and something sharper. Judgment. Ethan leaned closer, unfazed. Different how? And who's the prize? Jack's grin widened, a predator savoring the trap. She's a CEO, brilliant, stunning in her own way. A black woman who's built an empire from nothing, shaking up the tech world. You'll meet her soon enough. 2 months, Ethan. Make her love you. Make her say yes, or you owe me. Ethan's laugh echoed, bold and careless. 3 million? That's pocket change. I'm in. He extended his hand, sealing the bet with a handshake that felt like signing a contract in blood. The crowd around them stirred, some chuckling, others murmuring about the audacity of it all. A woman in a sequined gown nearby whispered to her companion, "A black woman? Really? That's bold for him." Her tone carried a sting, a subtle jab at the unspoken hierarchy of their world, where race still lingered in the shadows of wealth. Ethan barely noticed. To him, this was just another game, another chance to prove he was untouchable. He didn't care who she was or what made her different. He'd charm her, win her, and walk away richer. That's how it always worked. Days later, Ethan sat in a private dining room at Le Ciel, a restaurant where the city's elite dined above the clouds. The table was set with crisp linens and crystal, the view of Manhattan's skyline a silent boast of power. He adjusted his tie, his mind already strategizing. Jack had sent him her name in a dossier, a 28-year-old tech visionary, founder of a startup revolutionizing data analytics. Her company was small but fierce, catching the eye of every investor in Silicon Valley and beyond. Ethan skimmed the details. Graduated top of her class, spoke at global conferences, known for her unyielding confidence. Her photos showed a woman with luminous dark skin, high cheekbones, and eyes that seemed to see through walls. Beautiful, yes, but not in the polished, predictable way of the women Ethan usually pursued. That only made the challenge more enticing. The door opened, and she entered. Her crimson gown hugged her curves, the deep red, a bold statement against the muted elegance of the room. Her hair, a cascade of tight curls, framed her face like a crown. She moved with purpose, her heels clicking against the polished floor, and when she reached the table, she didn't wait for an invitation to sit. She met Ethan's gaze head-on, her expression unreadable but commanding. "You're the one who thinks he can buy love with a bet," she said, her voice low and steady, each word a dart. $3 million, right? I know all about it." Ethan froze, his practiced smile faltering. He'd expected to lead this dance, to charm her with small talk before revealing his hand. But she'd cut through his game before he could even start. He recovered quickly, leaning back in his chair, his grin returning. "You're well informed. I like that. So what's your angle?" She crossed her arms, her gold bracelet catching the light. "Here's my offer. We play along. You pretend to court me, I pretend to fall for you. We split the 3 million when it's done. A clean deal." Her eyes never wavered, sharp and calculating, daring him to refuse. Ethan's pulse quickened. This wasn't the script he'd envisioned. He'd planned to dazzle her with his charm, his wealth, his world. But her boldness, her audacity to turn his bet into her own game, intrigued him. "You're serious," he said, testing her. "You'd fake it for the money?" Her lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "I have my reasons. Do we have a deal?" He studied her, searching for a crack in her armor, but found none. She was a fortress, and that made her all the more compelling. "Deal," he said, extending his hand. Her grip was firm, her skin warm against his, and for a moment he felt a spark, not of victory, but of something unfamiliar, something that made his carefully controlled world feel unsteady. The next week, they launched their charade. Their first public appearance was at a charity gala in the heart of Manhattan, where the city's elite gathered to flaunt their wealth under the guise of philanthropy. Ethan, in a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's rent, escorted her on his arm. She wore a sleek emerald dress that turned heads, her presence commanding the room. Whispers followed them, some admiring, others laced with disdain. "She's stunning, but doesn't she seem out of place?" one investor muttered to another, his tone dripping with condescension. Ethan caught the remark and felt a flicker of irritation, though he brushed it off. This was a game, nothing more. She, however, was a master of the stage. She worked the room with ease, her laughter bright as she charmed a tech mogul here, a venture capitalist there. Ethan watched, half impressed, half unsettled. She wasn't just playing along, she was rewriting the rules. At one point, a silver-haired executive approached, his smile patronizing. "Your startup's impressive," he said to her. "How did someone like you break into this world? Must have been quite the journey." The words were polite, but the implication hung heavy. Her success, her presence, was an anomaly in his eyes. She didn't flinch. "Hard work and a better product than anyone else," she replied, her tone sweet but edged with steel. The executive blinked, caught off guard, and Ethan stifled a laugh. She was no one's pawn. As the night wore on, Ethan found himself drawn to her, not just her beauty, but her command, her refusal to shrink under scrutiny. He leaned in as they stood by a floor-to-ceiling window, the city sprawling below. "You're good at this," he said, his voice low. "Almost makes me think you're enjoying it." She turned to him, her eyes glinting with something he couldn't read. "Don't get too comfortable, Ethan. This is business." Her words were a reminder, a line drawn in the sand. But as she turned away, her shoulder brushing his, Ethan felt the stakes of their game shift. This wasn't just about $3 million anymore. Something deeper was at play, and for the first time, he wasn't sure he was in control. Ethan Sterling stood frozen for a moment, her shoulders brief brush against his, leaving an unexpected warmth. The Manhattan skyline sprawled below, a glittering testament to his world of power, yet her presence, commanding, unyielding, made him feel like a guest in his own game. As she glided back into the crowd, her laughter ringing out as she charmed another tech mogul, Ethan sensed the rules shifting beneath him. This wasn't just a bet anymore. It was a chessboard, and she was already 3 moves ahead. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of calculated appearances. Ethan and his new partner became the talk of New York's elite, their every outing a performance orchestrated to perfection. At a rooftop fundraiser, she dazzled in a sapphire gown, her poise drawing investors like moths to a flame. At a tech summit, she spoke with such clarity about her startup's data analytics platform that even Ethan, who rarely cared for the details of others' work, found himself listening intently. Her charisma was undeniable, but it was her ability to navigate the room, deflecting subtle slights with a smile, turning skepticism into admiration, that made her formidable. Ethan played his part, the charming suitor, his arm around her waist, his compliments polished. But each event left him more unsettled, as if he were the one being courted, not the other way around. Yet beneath the glamour, she faced a current of prejudice that Ethan was only beginning to notice. At a private dinner with Sterling Enterprises board, a silver-haired director leaned toward her, his tone dripping with condescension. "Your startup's numbers are impressive," he said, pausing to sip his wine. "But how do you handle the cultural challenges of leading in this industry?" The question hung heavy, its implication clear. Her blackness was a hurdle, an unspoken question mark in a world of pale faces and inherited wealth. She met his gaze, her smile unwavering. "I lead by results," she said, her voice smooth but cutting. "Numbers don't care about culture." The table fell silent, and Ethan, seated beside her, felt a flicker of pride he hadn't expected. But the director's tight smile and the quick shift in conversation told a different story, one of discomfort, of boundaries she dared to cross. Behind the scenes, she was playing a deeper game. Late at night, in the quiet of her sleek downtown apartment, she met with Marcus Lee, a former CFO of Sterling Enterprises. Marcus, a wiry man in his late 50s, with graying hair and a voice roughened by years of corporate battles, carried a weight of his own. His dismissal from Sterling's empire had been brutal, a fabricated corruption scandal that stripped him of his reputation and livelihood. Over coffee, he spread documents across her table, each page a piece of the puzzle she was assembling. "Your father trusted Sterling Sr.," Marcus said, his eyes hard. "He was his partner, his friend, until that man turned on him, bankrupted his company, smeared his name, drove him to despair. This," he tapped a folder filled with emails and financial records, "is the proof we need to expose him." She nodded, her expression unreadable, but her fingers trembled slightly as she traced the edges of a contract bearing her father's name. The memory of his defeat, his broken spirit, fueled her. "We move carefully," she said. "Ethan can't suspect a thing. I'm building trust with their partners, getting closer to the board. When the time comes, we'll hit them where it hurts." Marcus leaned back, a rare smile breaking through. "Your father would be proud. You're doing this for him, but you're doing it for everyone." Sterling crushed. Their plan was meticulous. She attended every high-profile event with Ethan, her charm disarming Sterling Enterprises allies. At a tech expo, she pitched her startup to a group of investors, her data-driven presentation leaving them nodding in approval. One, a venture capitalist with a reputation for ruthlessness, pulled her aside afterward. "You're a rare find," he said, his tone almost paternalistic. "Not many like you make it this far." The words, meant as a compliment, stung like a backhanded slap, implying her success was an exception, not a rule. She swallowed her anger, offering a tight smile. "I'm just getting started," she replied, her voice a velvet blade. Ethan, watching from across the room, caught the exchange and felt a pang of unease. He was starting to see the world she navigated, one where every word carried a hidden weight. Their public facade grew more convincing. At a gallery opening, they posed for photos, her hand resting lightly on his arm, his laughter genuine as she teased him about his taste in abstract art. The press ate it up, splashing headlines about New York's new power couple across society pages. But for her, every smile, every touch was a step closer to her goal. She slipped into conversations with Sterling's partners, asking innocent questions about their deals, their contracts. She noted names, dates, discrepancies, and fed it all to Marcus. Each piece of information was a brick in the wall she was building, one that would topple Sterling Sr.'s empire. Ethan, meanwhile, was caught in a strange dance. He'd expected to lead, to charm her into submission, but her confidence, her refusal to bend, kept him off balance. At a rooftop cocktail party, as they stood overlooking the Hudson River, he tried to steer the conversation personal. "You're not like anyone I've met," he said, his tone softer than usual. "What drives you? Why tech? Why this life?" She turned to him, her eyes searching his, as if weighing whether to let him in. "I built my company because I had to," she said, "because no one else was going to give me a seat at the table." Her words were raw, unguarded, and for a moment Ethan saw the fire beneath her poise. He wanted to ask more, to peel back the layers, but she turned away, redirecting the conversation to the event's guest list. The subtle slights continued to shadow her. At a boardroom meeting with Sterling Enterprises, a junior executive questioned her credentials during a discussion about potential partnerships. "Your startup's growth is surprising," he said, his tone implying doubt rather than admiration. "What's the secret to your traction?" The room grew quiet, the air thick with unspoken assumptions. Ethan, seated at the head of the table, felt his jaw tighten. He opened his mouth to intervene, but she beat him to it. "The secret," she said, leaning forward, her voice steady, "is outworking everyone else and delivering what others only promise." The executive flushed and the board moved on, but Ethan saw the toll it took. Her hand clenched briefly under the table, a fleeting crack in her armor. Their partnership was a tightrope. Ethan played the doting suitor, arranging dinners, sending flowers, each gesture part of their charade. But her responses, though perfectly acted, kept him at arm's length. At a quiet jazz club one evening, as a saxophone wailed in the background, he caught her staring into her drink, lost in thought. "What's on your mind?" he asked, genuinely curious. She looked up, her expression guarded. "Just thinking about how appearances can hide so much," she said. The words felt like a warning, but Ethan couldn't decipher them. He was too caught up in the game, too drawn to the enigma she presented. By the end of the second week, their act was seamless. They moved through New York's elite circles like a well-rehearsed play, her charm opening doors, his name keeping them ajar. But for her, every step was a calculated move toward justice. With Marcus's help, she uncovered a trail of offshore accounts, rigged contracts, and buried complaints, evidence of Sterling Sr.'s ruthless tactics. She stored it all, waiting for the moment to strike. Ethan, oblivious, felt the thrill of their charade, unaware that the woman on his arm was not just playing his game, but rewriting the board entirely. Their act was seamless, a polished performance that fooled New York's elite. But as she walked away from Ethan at the jazz club, her cryptic words, "Just thinking about how appearances can hide so much," echoed in his mind, a puzzle he couldn't solve. The city's lights flickered outside, mirroring the unease stirring within him. She was more than a partner in their charade. She was a mystery, one that both thrilled and unnerved him. As he watched her silhouette blend into the crowd, Ethan felt the game slipping from his grasp, unaware that the next days would reveal a side of himself he'd long buried, and a side of her he hadn't anticipated. Their public appearances continued, but she began steering them toward less glamorous settings, places where the city's pulse beat raw and unfiltered. One humid evening, she suggested a dive bar in Brooklyn, far from the glittering penthouses Ethan knew. The place was a clash of neon signs and worn wooden tables, the air thick with the scent of cheap beer and fried food. Ethan, in a tailored blazer that looked out of place among the bar's flannel-clad patrons, raised an eyebrow as they settled into a corner booth. "This is your idea of a date?" he teased, expecting her to match his banter. She leaned back, her denim jacket a stark contrast to the elegant gowns she'd worn at galas. "Not everything's about your world, Ethan," she said, her tone light but pointed. "Sometimes you need to see how the rest of us live." Her words carried a challenge, and Ethan, intrigued, let her lead. As they ordered drinks, a clumsy waiter knocked over a glass, sending shards skittering across the floor. The manager, a burly man with a scowl, berated the young server, whose face flushed with shame. Before Ethan realized what he was doing, he was on his knees, gathering the broken glass alongside the waiter. "It's just a glass," he said quietly, slipping a generous tip into the server's hand. "Don't let it ruin your night." She watched, her expression unreadable, though her eyes softened for a fleeting moment. Ethan's gesture was small, instinctive, but it cracked the facade of the arrogant playboy she'd expected. As they sipped their drinks, she steered the conversation to safer topics: music, the city, but Ethan caught her studying him, as if reassessing the man she'd agreed to deceive. He didn't know it, but that moment planted a seed of doubt in her carefully laid plans, a flicker of curiosity about who Ethan Sterling might truly be. Days later, at a community event in Harlem, Ethan saw another layer of her world. She'd invited him to a startup pitch night she'd organized, a showcase for young entrepreneurs seeking funding. The venue was a modest community center, its walls lined with vibrant murals, the room buzzing with eager faces, many of them Black and Latino, their dreams as bold as their pitches. Ethan, used to sterile boardrooms, felt out of place but stayed, drawn by her passion. She moved through the crowd, offering encouragement, her presence a beacon for the nervous presenters. When a young coder fumbled his pitch, she stepped in, asking questions that reframed his idea, giving him confidence. The crowd applauded, and Ethan, watching from the sidelines, felt a strange pride. Afterward, as they walked through the bustling streets, she opened up, her guard lower than usual. "These kids remind me of myself," she said, her voice soft. "No one hands you anything when you start from where I did. You build your own table." Ethan seized the moment, wanting to understand her fire. "Why do you care so much?" he asked. "You've already made it. Why keep fighting for others?" She stopped, her eyes locking onto his. "Because the system doesn't make it easy for people like me," she said. "Every win I have, I owe it to those who didn't get the chance." Her words hit Ethan harder than he expected, stirring memories of his father's ruthless deals, the lives he'd crushed to build Sterling Enterprises. For the first time, he wondered what his legacy might cost. But the world she navigated wasn't always kind. At a tech conference in Midtown, she presented her startup's latest innovation, a platform that predicted market trends with uncanny accuracy. The room, filled with industry giants, buzzed with interest, but not all were welcoming. A venture capitalist, his tie loosened and his tone patronizing, approached her after her talk. "Impressive work," he said, his smile thin. "Did you have a mentor guide you through this? Someone with experience in the field?" The implication was clear. Her success, as a Black woman, seemed improbable without a guiding hand. Ethan, standing nearby, caught the slight and felt his fist clench. He wanted to speak up, but she was already responding. "My team and I built this from the ground up," she said, her voice steady, her smile a shield. "Experience comes from doing, not waiting for permission." The capitalist nodded, chastened, but the exchange left a bitter taste. Ethan saw the flicker of exhaustion in her eyes, a weight she carried that he was only beginning to understand. Their evenings grew more intimate, though still carefully staged. One night at a quiet bookstore event celebrating local authors, Ethan surprised her by engaging with a poet, asking thoughtful questions about his work. She watched, intrigued, as Ethan revealed a curiosity she hadn't expected. Later, as they shared a coffee at a nearby cafe, he opened up about a project he'd kept secret, a foundation funding startups for young people locked out of traditional capital. "I saw too many good ideas die because of money," he said, his voice earnest. "The world needs people who dare to start over, like you." His words caught her off guard, a glimpse of a man who didn't fit the mold of his father's empire. She pushed the thought aside, reminding herself of her mission. But the warmth in his eyes lingered, a crack in her resolve. The prejudice she faced wasn't always overt. At a networking luncheon, a senior executive complimented her articulate presentation, a word that landed like a subtle jab, implying surprise at her eloquence. Another guest asked if her startup focused on urban markets, assuming her work was confined to a niche. Each comment, cloaked in politeness, chipped away at her, but she deflected with grace, her responses sharp and disarming. Ethan began to notice these moments more, his discomfort growing. At one event, when a financier questioned her funding sources, suggesting diversity grants must have played a role, Ethan couldn't stay silent. Her company's revenue speaks for itself, he said, his tone firm. Maybe you should look at her balance sheet instead of making assumptions. The room stilled, and she shot him a glance. Part surprise, part wariness. His defense was unexpected, and it stirred something in her, a flicker of trust she wasn't ready to embrace. Their time together began to blur the lines of their charade. One evening at a street festival in the East Village, they wandered through stalls of handmade crafts and food trucks, the air alive with music and laughter. Ethan, loosened by the casual setting, bought her a small, hand-carved pendant from a vendor, slipping it into her hand with a shy grin. "It reminded me of you," he said. "Bold, one of a kind." She accepted it, her fingers lingering on his for a moment longer than necessary. The gesture was small, but it felt real, and for the first time, she wondered if Ethan's kindness was more than an act. She pushed the thought away, focusing on the files Marcus sent her that morning, more evidence of Sterling Sr.'s corruption. Her goal was justice, not connection. As the days passed, Ethan's actions revealed a man at odds with his reputation. He stayed late at the community center, mentoring a young entrepreneur long after the event ended. He listened intently when she spoke about her vision, not just nodding but asking questions that showed he cared. Yet she remained guarded, her heart tethered to the memory of her father's downfall. Each kind act from Ethan was a challenge to her plan, a reminder that the man she was deceiving might not be the enemy she'd assumed. But as they stood together at the festival, the pendant heavy in her pocket, she felt the weight of her mission and the danger of letting Ethan too close. The music and laughter of the East Village swirled around them, but her mind was elsewhere, anchored to the files Marcus had sent her that morning. Damning evidence of Sterling Sr.'s corruption. Each kind gesture from Ethan, each glimpse of his unexpected humanity, threatened to blur her focus. She clutched the pendant, its edges pressing into her palm, a reminder of her purpose. Tonight she would set the final pieces in motion. Tomorrow the world would know the truth. The following days were a storm of precision and secrecy. She moved through Sterling Enterprises' orbit with surgical intent, her charm now a weapon honed to perfection. At a high-stakes board meeting, she sat beside Ethan, her presence a quiet force as the directors debated a new acquisition. She asked pointed questions about the deal's financing, her tone innocent but probing, planting seeds of doubt. One director, a grizzled man with a penchant for bluntness, raised an eyebrow. "You're awfully curious about our books," he said, his voice tinged with suspicion. "Most partners stick to the gala circuit." The comment carried a subtle jab, implying her place was decorative, not strategic. She smiled unruffled. "I like to know who I'm working with," she replied, her words smooth but laced with steel. Ethan, seated at the head of the table, shot her a glance, half admiring, half curious, unaware that her questions were unearthing cracks in his father's empire. Behind closed doors, she and Marcus finalized their plan. In a dimly lit cafe in Soho, far from the prying eyes of Manhattan's elite, Marcus handed her a USB drive. "This is it," he said, his voice low, his eyes burning with resolve. "Offshore accounts, falsified audits, emails tying Sterling Sr. to your father's downfall. It's enough to bury him." She took the drive, her fingers steady but her heart racing. The documents detailed how Sterling Sr. had sabotaged her father's company, rigging contracts to drive him into bankruptcy, then smearing his name to cover the betrayal. Her father, once a visionary entrepreneur, had been broken by the loss, his health crumbling until he passed away. She swallowed the grief, channeling it into focus. "We leaked this to the press and the board simultaneously," she said. "No warning. No escape." Marcus nodded, his face etched with years of resentment. "He took everything from me, too," he said. "Framed me for corruption, ruined my career. This is for your father, for me, for everyone he crushed." She met his gaze, a silent pact forged in shared pain. The USB drive felt like a grenade in her hand, its pin already pulled. The moment came at a charity auction, a glittering affair where New York's elite bid on art and influence. She and Ethan arrived arm in arm, their charade perfected. She wore a gold gown that shimmered under the chandeliers, her presence drawing every eye. But beneath her radiant smile, she was a storm ready to break. As the auctioneer called for bids, She slipped away, uploading the files to a secure server. Within hours, the evidence would reach key journalists in Sterling Enterprises' board. She returned to Ethan's side, her heart pounding, but her face serene. He leaned in, his voice low. "You look like you're plotting a takeover," he teased, unaware of how close he was to the truth. She laughed, the sound light but hollow. "Just enjoying the show," she said, her eyes scanning the room, calculating the fallout. By dawn, the city was ablaze with scandal. Headlines screamed across every major outlet. Sterling Enterprises embroiled in corruption scandal. The articles detailed decades of unethical deals, with her father's company as a prominent casualty. The board convened an emergency meeting, and Sterling Sr., a towering figure with a voice like gravel, faced a barrage of accusations. His face, usually a mask of control, betrayed panic as he deflected questions. "These are fabrications," he growled, but the evidence was ironclad. Bank records, emails, witness accounts from former employees like Marcus. By midday, the board voted unanimously to demand his resignation. Sterling Sr., cornered, had no choice. He stepped down, his legacy in tatters, and Ethan, stunned, was named interim CEO. Ethan sat in his father's office, the mahogany desk now his, the weight of the moment crushing. He dreamed of leading Sterling Enterprises, but not like this, not in the wake of betrayal he hadn't seen coming. The board praised his potential, citing his charm and recent visibility with her as proof of his readiness. But Ethan's mind reeled. The speed of his father's fall, the precision of the scandal, felt orchestrated. He replayed every moment with her, their dinners, her questions, her guarded smiles. Suspicion gnawed at him, but he pushed it aside, unwilling to believe she could be the architect of this chaos. That evening, in the quiet of his penthouse, she arrived, her expression unreadable. The city's skyline glowed behind her, a stark contrast to the storm brewing between them. Ethan poured 2 glasses of whiskey, his hands unsteady. "You knew something, didn't you?" he asked, his voice low, searching her face for answers. She stood by the window, her silhouette framed against the city, and for a moment she seemed untouchable, a queen surveying a fallen kingdom. "I knew everything," she said, turning to face him. Her voice was steady, but her eyes held a storm of emotion. Anger, pain, resolve. "Your father destroyed my father. They were partners, Ethan. Friends. Until Sterling Sr. betrayed him, rigged deals to bankrupt his company, smeared his name until he had nothing left. My father died because of it, broken and alone. I came into your world for one reason, to make sure your father paid for what he did." Ethan's breath caught, the whiskey glass trembling in his hand. The truth hit like a tidal wave, washing away the illusion of their partnership. He saw it now. Her calculated moves, her charm, her questions, all part of a plan he'd been too blind to see. "The bet," he said, his voice hoarse. "It was never about the money for you, was it?" She shook her head, a bitter smile flickering. "The money was a means to an end. I needed to get close, to earn trust, to find the truth. And I did." Her voice wavered, betraying the pain beneath her strength. "But I didn't expect you to be different. I didn't expect to see someone who might not be like him." Her words pierced him, a mix of accusation and reluctant admiration. Ethan stepped closer, his heart pounding. "I'm not my father," he said, his voice raw. "I've seen what he's done, the lives he's ruined. I want to be better, to lead differently. Stay, please. Let's build something real. Together." His plea was desperate, his eyes searching hers for a spark of hope. She looked at him, tears glistening but unshed. "I can forgive the sins of the father," she said softly, "but I can't pretend the past didn't happen. You're not him, Ethan, but this," she gestured to the space between them, "was built on a lie. I need to be true to myself first." Her voice broke, but her resolve held firm. She turned toward the door, pausing only to glance back, her eyes heavy with sorrow and strength. "You have a chance to change things now," she said. "Don't waste it." Ethan stood frozen as she walked away, the door closing with a soft click that echoed like a gunshot. The city's lights glittered outside, indifferent to his turmoil. He'd won the CEO's chair, but the victory felt hollow. She'd dismantled his father's empire, exposed his sins, and left Ethan with a truth he couldn't unsee. For the first time, he saw the cost of his family's legacy and the woman who'd forced him to face it. Her final words, "You have a chance to change things now. Don't waste it," burned in his mind, a challenge and a farewell. As the penthouse's silence enveloped him, Ethan felt the weight of a new path forming, one he'd have to walk alone. But her strength, her resolve, lingered like a beacon, urging him to become the man she'd glimpsed beneath the Playboy's facade. In the days that followed, she made her choice clear. She didn't linger in New York's orbit, didn't attend the galas or board meetings where Ethan now sat at the helm. Instead, she vanished from his world as swiftly as she'd entered it, leaving only whispers of her departure. Word reached him through a mutual contact. She was leaving the city, bound for San Francisco to launch a venture capital fund for women of color in tech. The news struck Ethan like a blow, but it also sparked a flicker of admiration. She wasn't just walking away. She was building something new, something true to her vision. He wanted to reach out, to beg her to stay, but her words echoed in his mind. She needed to be true to herself first. Respecting that meant letting her go. Ethan threw himself into his new role as CEO, determined to redefine Sterling Enterprises. The boardroom, once his father's domain of ruthless deals, became his battleground for change. He pored over the company's records, confronting the full scope of his father's actions. Contracts rigged to crush competitors, employees silenced with payouts, communities overlooked for profit. The weight of it was crushing, but Ethan saw it as a chance to rewrite his legacy. He launched an internal audit, hiring independent investigators to uncover every buried wrong. At a press conference, he stood before a sea of cameras, his voice steady but raw. "Sterling Enterprises has a past, but it also has a future," he said. "We're committed to transparency, to fairness, to rebuilding trust." The words felt like a vow, not just to the public but to her, wherever she was. Yet the elite circles he navigated were not so quick to embrace change. At a private dinner with investors, one scoffed at his reforms, his tone dripping with condescension. "You're young, Ethan. Idealism fades. Your father knew how to play the game." The remark stung, a reminder of the world that had shaped him. But Ethan leaned forward, his gaze unflinching. "The game's changing," he said, "and I'm not my father." The room grew quiet, and though some investors exchanged skeptical glances, others nodded, intrigued by the fire in his eyes. He was beginning to carve his own path, one that valued integrity over conquest. Her absence was a constant ache, but it fueled his resolve. Ethan channeled his energy into initiatives she'd inspired. He expanded his foundation for young entrepreneurs, focusing on communities long ignored by venture capital. At a Brooklyn community center, he met with aspiring founders, listening to their pitches, offering mentorship instead of just money. One young woman presenting a health tech startup reminded him of her, fierce, determined, unafraid to challenge the status quo. "You're going to shake things up," he told her, a smile breaking through. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The words felt like an echo of what he wished he could say to her, a way to keep her influence alive. The prejudice he'd once overlooked now glared at him in stark relief. At a tech summit, he overheard a board member dismiss a black founder's proposal as too niche, the same coded language he'd heard aimed at her. Ethan stepped in, his voice firm. "Their data outperforms half the portfolios in this room," he said. "Maybe it's your perspective that's too narrow." The board member bristled, but Ethan didn't back down. He was learning to see the world through her eyes, recognizing the subtle barriers she'd faced. Each confrontation was a step toward dismantling the biases he'd been blind to, a tribute to the woman who'd opened his eyes. Meanwhile, she was building her own legacy on the West Coast. In San Francisco, she launched her fund, a beacon for women of color in tech. Her first event, a pitch night for female founders, drew a crowd of eager innovators. She stood at the podium, her presence commanding, her voice steady as she spoke of breaking barriers and creating opportunity. "This isn't just about funding," she said, her eyes scanning the room. "It's about proving we belong at every table." The applause was thunderous, but her thoughts drifted briefly to New York, to the man she left behind. His kindness, his unexpected defense of her, lingered in her memory, but she pushed it aside. Her mission was bigger than one man, bigger than a fleeting connection. Ethan's reforms began to ripple. Sterling Enterprises partnered with community organizations, funding STEM programs for underserved youth. He hired a diverse leadership team, ignoring the raised eyebrows from old guard executives. At a board meeting, he unveiled a plan to redirect profits into social impact ventures, a move that sparked heated debate. "This isn't how we do business," one director snapped, his face red. Ethan met his gaze, unflinching. "It's how we do business now," he said. "Profit without purpose is just greed." The room fell silent, and though resistance lingered, Ethan felt a shift. He was no longer just Sterling Sr.'s son. He was Ethan, forging a new way. Her influence remained, even in her absence. Late one night, Ethan found the pendant he'd given her at the festival, left behind on his penthouse coffee table. He turned it over in his hands, its carved edges a reminder of their fleeting connection. He'd kept it, unable to let go, a symbol of the woman who changed him. He began writing a letter, pouring out his thoughts, his regret, his admiration, his hope for her future. But he never sent it. She'd made her choice, and he respected it, even if it left a void no boardroom victory could fill. A year later, at a national tech conference in San Francisco, Ethan stood among a crowd of innovators, his company now a leader in ethical tech. He transformed Sterling Enterprises, earning praise for its transparency and impact. But his heart raced as he scanned the program, seeing her name as a keynote speaker. He slipped into the auditorium, standing at the back, watching as she took the stage. Her voice was electric, her presence magnetic as she spoke of her fund's mission to empower women of color. "We're not just building businesses," she said, her eyes sweeping the crowd. "We're building a future where everyone has a voice." Their eyes met across the room, a fleeting moment that held a world of unspoken words. Ethan saw pride in her gaze, but also distance, a reminder that their paths had diverged. He smiled, a quiet acknowledgement of her triumph, and she nodded, a gesture so small it might have gone unnoticed. But to Ethan, it was everything, a sign that she saw the man he was becoming. As she continued her speech, he slipped out, the ache of their unfulfilled love tempered by a resolve to honor her lessons. Ethan returned to New York, his purpose clearer than ever. He led Sterling Enterprises with a vision rooted in fairness, inspired by her strength. The pendant remained on his desk, a quiet reminder of the woman who'd reshaped his world. She, in San Francisco, built her fund into a powerhouse, her name synonymous with change. Their story was unfinished, but it was theirs, a collision of truth, pain, and transformation that left them both stronger, even apart. What a journey we've shared with Ethan and his transformative path. Did her strength and resolve inspire you, or did Ethan's redemption steal your heart? Maybe you're wondering what's next for them both. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and share what moved you most about this story. Are you rooting for a reunion, or do you admire her choice to forge her own way? Your insights make these stories come alive, so let us know where you're tuning in from and what resonated with you. A huge thank you for joining us on this emotional ride. Your support means the world. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for more captivating tales. Until next time, keep chasing your own truth and stay inspired. See you in the next story.